It was early morning in odd West Virginia. The clouds hung low, pressing softly against the trees that surrounded the small white house that once held a family the world had come to know. And in many ways, never truly understood the Whittaker home quiet now, bore the weight of stories untold. The porch light flickered faintly. Even in daylight, as if refusing to go dark, Betty Whittaker sat on the front steps, her hands folded tightly, eyes fixed on the dirt road that led up to her house. She had been told they were coming, not family, not friends, but APS and Adult Protective Services for weeks. The online world had been buzzing about what might happen next after months of separation, heartbreak, and endless speculation. This visit would mark a turning point, though no one yet knew in which direction. The sound of tires crunching gravel broke the silence. A white SUV pulled up. Two people stepped out. Clipboards in hand, Betty straightened her posture, her eyes wide but calm. She had cleaned the small living room the night before, placing framed photos of Ray and Lorraine on the mantel. On the table beside her, an open Bible. From the outside, it looked like any other visit, standard, procedural, but for Betty it meant everything inside the car. One of the APS workers, a middle-aged woman with a practiced calm, looked at her partner and sighed. "This one's hard," she said softly. "She's been through more than most." Betty stood to greet them as they approached. Her voice trembled slightly as she said, "You hear about my babies?" The woman nodded gently. "We're here to talk about things, Betty, to check in, see how you're doing." That's how these visits always began. Polite, measured, clinical, but under the surface. This wasn't a routine welfare check. This was about what came next. Would there be a path for the Whittaker family to be reunited? Or was this visit a formality? The last chapter in a story, too, heavy for the state to carry any longer. For the online audience, the answer seemed simple: bring them home. But within the walls of that small, worn-down house, the truth was much more complicated. Few days earlier, Brian, the man who had been the family's most recent point of contact, had gone live to explain what he knew. His words were heavy. "They're going to visit Betty this week," he said, APS. "They said they just need to see how she's doing, what changes she's made since the last time. But from what I understand, this visit could mean a lot more than that. This could decide if there's even a chance, any chance, that she gets to see Timmy, Lorraine, or Ray again." The comments flew fast. "God bless Betty. She deserves to see them again. Please tell me Eric's going to help this time." But then Brian paused, his expression darkening. "Eric's done," he said flatly. "He told me he's finished with all of it. No more filming, no more back and forth, no more talking about the money," he said. And I'm quoting here, "I've said my piece, let them do what they will." Those words hit hard for months. Eric had been at the center of both controversy and defense. He was the one who started the fundraiser, who filmed the family's most intimate moments, who promised that help was coming. And then suddenly,
he became the villain in the eyes of many now.
As APS prepared to visit Betty, his silence felt final back at the house. Betty walked them inside. The APS workers took notes quietly, glancing around the room. The old sofa, covered with a freshly washed blanket, the faint scent of pine cleaner lingered. Timmy entered first, his familiar grin lighting the room. Behind him came Lorraine, shy as ever, and finally Ray, walking carefully with assistance for a moment. Time stopped. Betty's hands flew to her face as tears poured down. "Oh, my babies," she whispered. Timmy ran into her arms, and she held him tightly, rocking him back and forth. Kissing his hair, Lorraine clung to her sleeve, and Ray's eyes filled as he took his sister's hand. There were no words, just the sound of quiet sobbing and soft laughter. 30 minutes passed like seconds. When the time was up, an APS worker gently said, "We need to wrap up." "Ms. Whittaker." Betty nodded, though her eyes never left them. "You be good," she said softly. "Mama loves you always." As they left the room, she stood by the window until their figures disappeared through the hallway door. On the ride home, she didn't speak for a while. Finally, she said, "They look good. Brian, they look healthy. Timmy's hair done grew out. Lorraine got new shoes. They're taken care of. I can sleep tonight." Brian swallowed hard. "You did good, Betty. I don't know what's next," she said quietly, "but today, Today was enough. Later that evening, Brian released what would become his most watched video to date, the Visit Betty Whittaker's first reunion. He didn't include footage from inside the building, just shots of the drive, the outside of the center, and a closing frame of Betty sitting on her porch afterward, hands folded, staring out toward the sunset. His voice narrated softly over the scene. Sometimes closure isn't a perfect ending. Sometimes it's just a quiet moment, one that reminds you that love outlasts everything today. Betty Whittaker saw her family again. It wasn't long. It wasn't everything, but it was something. And sometimes, that's enough. The comment section flooded with emotion. I'm crying, God bless Betty. This story broke me and healed me at the same time. Thank you, Brian, for giving them dignity. Amid the thousands of messages, one stood out. It came from an unverified account. No profile picture. No name. Thank you for letting her see them. That's all I wanted. It was signed. Simply, the weeks passed. The story quieted again. As all viral moments do, new stories replaced it. New controversies arose, but for the people who had followed every update, the Whittakers remained etched into memory. Symbols of endurance, pain, and the stubborn strength of love. APS had not yet made a final ruling. The process would stretch on. Paperwork, inspections, hearings. But Betty was patient now. She knew what she was waiting for. Sometimes she would still sit on the porch, humming softly, her eyes fixed on the winding road ahead. The cookies she'd baked for that visit were long gone, but she kept the empty plastic bag tucked into a drawer. Just to remember the day, she said in one of his final updates. Brian said quietly to the camera, I don't know how this story ends. Maybe they all come home. Maybe they don't. But what I do know is that Betty showed us what love looks like. When it refuses to give up, Eric showed us what regret sounds like, and somewhere in the middle of it all, maybe we learned a little something about ourselves, about compassion, about patience, about grace. He looked off camera, his voice softening. This isn't just the Whittaker story anymore. It's a reminder that even the forgotten deserve to be seen. As winter settled over the hills of West Virginia, when they left, Betty stood in the doorway long after their car disappeared down the hill. She didn't know what they meant by help, but something in their tone, softer this time, less distant, gave her a small flicker of hope. Later that evening, Brian filmed a short update in his truck again. They came back today, he said. Second visit in less than 2 weeks. That's huge. That means they're taking it seriously now. He leaned closer to the camera. And listen, I don't know who needs to hear this, but it's not about money anymore. It's about people. It's about healing. Betty's doing everything she's supposed to do, but she's also hurting. This ain't a movie. This is a real woman sitting in that house alone, waiting for a call that decides her life. His voice cracked slightly as he continued. And as for Eric, I know a lot of y'all hate him, I get it, but maybe he's hurting too. Maybe this whole thing broke him in ways we don't see. I don't excuse it, but I understand it. He paused, eyes glistening in the dim light. We gotta stop choosing sides and start choosing compassion. The video went viral, not because it exposed new details, but because of its tone, raw, human, unfiltered. It struck something in people who had forgotten that behind the headlines and the controversy were lives still unfolding. The next morning, Betty's phone finally rang. It was APS Ms. Whittaker, a voice said. We'd like to schedule a preliminary family meeting next week. It won't be a full visit, just a conference call between you. The case manager and a representative from the state will discuss next steps. Betty's hands trembled as she held the phone. Will they be there? She asked. The woman hesitated. Not yet. But this is progress. When Brian arrived that afternoon, she told him the news with a small smile. They calling me for a meeting, she said. Ain't much. But it's something, Brian grinned. That's a start. Betty, that's the first good step, she nodded. I just want to hear their voices again. That night, Brian shared the update online. The headline read, A Glimmer of Hope, Betty's First Step Toward Reunification. In the video, he said, after everything, the visits, the silence, the rumors, we finally got a little bit of light. It's not over, it's just starting again. Then, near the end, he played something quietly from his phone, a recording of a voicemail he hadn't shared before. It was Eric's voice, faint and tired, I hope they get their family back, I really do. I might have said I was done, but I never stopped caring. Sometimes you walk away not because you don't love them, but because you can't fix what's broken anymore. Brian's eyes lowered as the message ended. That, he said softly, was Eric's final word. He didn't add commentary, he didn't defend or condemn. He just let the silence after the message speak for itself in the comments. The tone shifted for the first time in months. People weren't fighting, they were praying. Maybe there's still a chance. We all failed them in some way, let's bring them home. In odd, the night grew still. The moonlight fell over the Whittaker home. Touching the windows with a faint silver glow, Betty knelt by her bed, whispering a prayer. Lord, I don't ask for much, just bring them back safe. And if it's not time yet, give me strength to wait. Outside, the rain had stopped. The ground was soaked, but the air was clear. The kind of night that hinted, just faintly, at new beginnings. The morning of the meeting came quietly. The sun rose pale over the hills of Odd, West Virginia, and the air was heavy with the kind of stillness that comes before something important inside the Whittaker home. Betty sat at her kitchen table, dressed in a soft blue sweater that Brian had brought her a week earlier. Her phone was propped up against a coffee mug, waiting for the call that might finally bring some answers. A folded notepad sat beside her, blank, except for one line written at the top, ask when they can come home. She didn't have much else to write. The call came at 9:03 a.m. sharp. Good morning. Ms. Whittaker, said the voice on the other end. This is Angela with Adult Protective Services. Can you hear me okay? Betty nodded instinctively before realizing they couldn't see her. Yes. Eric's words, now public, divided the audience again. Some sympathized, and others condemned one comment under Brian's video read. He walked away from the family that gave him everything. Another said, he's right to leave, this story broke too many people. But for Betty, none of that mattered. She didn't even know about the messages, the theories, or the fights online. Her only concern was the next knock on the door a week later. It came this time. It wasn't APS. It was the county maintenance crew. They'd been sent to assess some structural repairs that the agency had requested during their last visit. Two men in reflective vests arrived with a clipboard and a quiet professionalism that suggested they'd seen plenty of homes like this before. They walked through the rooms, making notes about the flooring, the wiring, the insulation. One of them, a younger man, whispered to the other, "It's clean, she's trying." When they left, Betty asked if they knew anything about her family. The older one hesitated. "Ma'am," he said gently, "we don't know about that part. We just make sure the house is safe." As they drove off, Betty leaned against the porch railing, looking down the road again. Safe. That word kept ringing in her head. If the house is safe, why can't they come home that evening? Brian called. His tone was cautious. "Betty, I heard something from a friend," he said. "They said APS might be meeting with Patrick next week." Her eyes widened. "Patrick?" "Yeah," Brian said. "He's supposed to be talking to them about long-term care for Ray and Lorraine. It doesn't mean bad news, it might just mean they're making plans." "Plans," Betty repeated. "For what? They ain't sick, they just need to be home." Brian didn't know how to answer it later. On his Facebook page, he summarized the call. APS did their visit, house inspection followed. No clear timeline yet for visits or reunification. Eric has stepped away. Permanently, Patrick may be meeting with state reps soon. This situation's more tangled than ever. The post received thousands of comments, many from people expressing frustration at the system, but some turning their anger on each other. The story had become something larger than one family. It was a reflection of something deeper: poverty, misunderstanding, and the slow machinery of bureaucracy grinding through lives that didn't fit its model. A few days later, Brian returned to film again, this time with Betty's permission. The camera rolled as she stood by her front door, sunlight spilling over her shoulders. Her voice trembled, but she spoke clearly. "I just want to say thank you to everybody that's been praying for us. I don't understand why it's taking so long, but I still believe in God. I believe He's gonna bring my family back home. I just don't want nobody fighting over us. I just want peace." When the clip went online, the reaction was overwhelming. Tens of thousands of views within hours. Hundreds of comments poured in. "Betty, You are the strongest woman we know. Don't give up, we're with you. This is what faith looks like. But among them were a few harsh voices. People claiming that the family's problems were too deep. That reunification would never happen. Brian pinned a single comment at the top. This isn't about fame, it's about humanity. Later that night, Brian received a voicemail. It was from a private number, but the voice was unmistakable. Eric. I didn't mean for any of this to get this far, the voice said. Calm, but strained. Tell Betty I never wanted to hurt her. I did what I thought was right. Maybe I was wrong. I hope she forgives me. Goodbye. Brian sat in silence after listening. Then he played it again the next morning. He called Betty. I got a message from Eric, he said quietly. Eric, she asked. Confused, he the one with the camera? Yeah. Brian said. He said he's sorry. He hopes you forgive him. Betty's eyes softened. Ain't nothing to forgive, she said. He helped when he could. I don't hold hate for nobody. That day, a storm rolled through Odd. Heavy rain. Wind beating against the old windows inside, Betty moved slowly through the house, humming softly as she placed folded laundry on the couch. A photo of Ray and Lorraine smiled from the table. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a small moment of peace.